So today, I want to tell you a terrible story of how over 132 property owners lost everything and how this could happen to you. In fact, a recent study by Deakin University found that over 97% of buildings in New South Wales had at least one defect, 74% in Victoria and 71% in Queensland. And COVID has made things way worse. If you're thinking about buying a home in 2021, then you need to keep watching this video because it could save you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. See this building? Looks pretty nice, right? Well, appearances can be deceiving. This is Mascot Tower, and it's become a case study on everything that's wrong with property development in Australia. Around 2 years ago, this building was found to have cracks in the basement, which prompted emergency evacuation of residents due to concerns about the structure. And since then, the owners had to continue paying their mortgages, levies, insurances for a building that can't be lived in or sold. And now they're looking at a last-ditch vote on a collective sale that would see the property owners incurring a loss of 70 to 80% on the purchase price of their home. For a lot of the residents, that would mean losses of over $700,000, which would push them to bankruptcy. They can't even take legal action against the developers since the developer went into liquidation. It's a terrible situation, and my heart goes out to these poor property owners whose dream of owning their own home has turned into such a nightmare. I don't want the same thing to happen to you. So in this video, we're going to take a deeper look into what the hell is going on with property development in Australia. I'll give you some advice on how you can avoid falling into the $700,000 debt trap. And finally, I'll give you my opinion on how we can fix the problem, and if you can hit that like and subscribe, you'd make my day. Let's jump right in. All right, first up, let's take a look at a dirty secret in Australia's apartment building industry. That is defects in construction. Listen guys, the sad reality is the Mascot Tower is not the only apartment building in Australia that has had major issues. On Christmas Eve 2018, residents in Opal Tower in Sydney had to be evacuated due to cracks in their building. Listen, they eventually returned to their apartments during 2019 after the builder carried out a series of building rectification works. But like they said in infomercials, wait, there's more, a lot more. As I mentioned earlier, a pilot study by Deakin University, Nicole Johnson, and Griffith University, Sasha Reed, identified a whopping 3,227 building defects across 212 building audit reports. That's an average of 14 per building. Like I said, in New South Wales, over 97% of buildings had at least one defect. In Victoria, it was over 74%, and Queensland, it was 71% of buildings had at least one defect. Now you might be thinking, oh Jayden, it's just one defect, what's wrong, a bit of paint peeling? No! The most common defects identified in the report were water ingress, internal and external wall cracking, roofing and guttering problems, and tiling faults. More than 40% of the defects identified in the 212 building audit reports were related to cladding, followed by 13% in fireproofing, 11% in waterproofing, 8% roof and rainwater disposal, and 7% structural. So what's the issue with cladding? It's a huge one. Combustible cladding is a massive risk. Remember the Grenfell Tower disaster in 2017? It claimed 27 lies and showed the world exactly how risky dangerous cladding was. Authorities in Australia have identified more than 3,400 residential apartment buildings that they've deemed as having flammable cladding. And if your apartment has combustible cladding, there's a chance that you'll be the one left footing the bill. And the cost to fix it, according to Urban Developer, can range anywhere from $30,000 to $12 million, depending on the scope of the work required. And you've got to remember, it's not just the cost of putting on and removing the cladding, it's all the extras. This actually happened to the block of units where my grandparents live here in Brisbane. The cladding started to come off the side of the buildings and a bunch of other issues. After months of negotiating with the builder, they finally agreed to have it sorted out. The cost was in the millions of dollars. And you assume it's as easy as ripping off the cladding and putting in a new one. And yeah, well, it might be if it wasn't a 12-story building. You've got to remember there's the cost of scaffolding. Tradespeople need to access a building, so they've got to walk through the units. There was also the cost of housing all the occupants of the units while the work was going on, because you couldn't live in a unit while tradespeople going back and forth. And all those costs add up. That the strata needs to cover all these costs. So it's not just the cost of cladding, it can be huge. Don't also forget that in my grandparents' case, this work took over 9 months to complete. The whole building was cocooned in scaffolding. So for that 9-month period, how easy do you think it would be to sell or rent out an apartment? But what tenant or potential owner would want to move into a new unit that looks like a construction site? Buyer beware, that's for sure. So why can't you trust the property developers? You'd think that the property developers and their agents would have a legal responsibility to tell the home buyers about any defects in the property. And technically, they do. The law states that an agent is required to tell a prospective buyer about any defects they know or ought to know about. But there is no disclosure obligation on the developers unless they are selling directly to the purchasers. And it's very much the case of buyer beware, because the developers aren't going to go out of their way to tell you. You're genuinely not going to believe this quote from the Sydney Morning Herald. So just ask developer Nick Sear, who's the developer behind the Green Hub Apartments in Asquith. The government put a prohibition order on the development because it had serious defects, including complete absence of waterproofing elements on external facing windows, no spoon drain in the basement car park levels, and a stormwater downpipe installed in the basement fire stairs. Mr. Sear had said that when the building is complete, it will be defect free. But it, in quotes, doesn't mean I have to tell every buyer every little thing that happens if they don't ask. No one is asking that question about defects, but if people ask, I will tell them the truth. If nobody asks about them, why would I need to tell them? That is insane. You might not get your money back. So you can't trust the property developers. And what happens if your apartment does have major issues that crop up? Well, thanks to a wonderful business model called Phoenixing, there's a good chance that the company that built your apartment will no longer exist. Phoenixing is where developers create companies for a specific development. They do a quick and dirty build of that apartment, take the profits, and then shut down that company before they can get pursued in court over any defects. So if anything goes wrong, the developer can just pull the pin and walk away. And at the end of the day, you're the one left footing the bill. This very thing happened to me in an apartment in Camperdown, and we'll go through the defect report in a tick. So how do you protect yourself? There are currently 1.1 million people living under strata schemes, and that number is only going to continue to grow. So how can you, a future buyer, protect yourself from a disaster like Mascot Tower? Here are a few tips. First, make sure you get a strata report. Looking at the strata records will allow you to know what you're buying into and estimate the risk. I can tell you firsthand how valuable strata reports are. Years ago, I was on the verge of buying an apartment in Sydney and almost skipped over the strata report to save a bit of money. They cost a bunch. I'm glad I shelled out for one. The strata report showed that the apartment had some concrete cancer in the building. If I'd gone ahead with the purchase, I would have been looking at an extra $15,000 in special levies over the next 2 years to rectify it. And that was just one building. I looked at another one that was even worse. This one was in Camperdown. In that one, you'd expect everything to be right. The apartment complex was only 3 years old. But let me show you the strata report.
I've blacked out the address because obviously I had it done quite a few years ago when I bought my first place. So you'd hope that they've fixed all the issues with the property since then. The actual full report, like it says there, is much longer. This is the strata report. This is pretty much a summary of all their findings. So it's got a bunch of disclaimers. I guess the first thing you can notice here is that this strata manager has only just taken over. There's some major defects. The builder has become insolvent, so they've done the classic Phoenix, which we cover from the video, and there's a bunch of issues there. There's defects, initially reported of 30,000, but as we'll go through the report, you'll see that they're way worse than that. So in this case, it shows the unit that I was looking at, the amount of units that's there, what my entitlement is, so what I have to pay, with proportion to the total amount of unit owners there. And I guess the first red flag here is that the administration fund is actually in negative. So the administration fund or administrative fund is used to manage the day-to-day expenses of running the strata scheme, including sort of maintaining the common property, paying for insurance, other recurring expenses like, I guess, electricity for the complex, carpet cleaning, lawn mowing, and that kind of thing. So obviously pretty bad if it's in the negative, and that's their day-to-day money. You definitely want them to have cash in there. Then the sinking fund, it's actually called Capital Works Fund now. So it's got $96,000, but they need to have enough money to pay for pretty much, well, by law, they're required to have a 10-year plan in place. So they need to have funds for covering sort of the painting of common property, acquiring or, changing sort of personal property for the scheme, if there's an office or something like that, or renewing fixtures and repair or replace stuff in the common property. So if, I don't know, lights break or things break, you need to have enough money there. I guess the other red flag here, so the current owner who I was looking at buying the property on was already in arrears on their strata. So they probably knew there was issues coming and they're like, I'm not going to pay it till I sell out of this potential lemon. This is where stuff gets even worse. So special levies are raised when generally there's issues, and outside of your regular strata or body corporate fees, they need to raise some money. Obviously in this case, because they have no money in the admin fund to cover costs. But in this case, there was over $110,000 worth of defect works and $62,000 of fire requirements required to be fixed on the property. So it's pretty bad. It goes through, shows some of the minutes and meetings, shows some expenditure, stuff that they've spent money on so far. And the crazy part about all this is, like I said earlier, the building's only 3 years old. It's 3 years old, and there was all these issues, which, like, for me as a first home buyer, I had my minimum deposit. I didn't have any money left over. Like, I had no way of actually paying for these costs if they did a special levy on top of the regular body corporate or strata fees. So it's just crazy. You cannot underestimate the value of a strata inspection report. Also attached to it was this report that was actually commissioned by the strata body corporate and went through all these issues with the building. Oh, there's leaking, there's water ingress. This is in people's apartments, and they're full of just wet, soggy carpet. Look at that. There's like mold on the skirting boards. It's just, it's insane. So you definitely have to do this, and like we'll cover in a tick, you definitely want to get a building and PEST to check out this stuff in way more detail, because the agent might not even be aware this is stuff in other apartments, or the body corporate might only just be coming across the issues now.
As you can see, strata reports are long and complicated, so make sure you hire a professional to go through them, to make the report, and they'll let you know if there are any major issues. Unfortunately, the one thing that strata reports won't show are issues that haven't actually cropped up. For example, Mascot Towers didn't actually develop cracks in the basement until 10 years after it was built. Also, strata reports aren't going to help you if you're buying off the plan. So what else can you do to look out for potential issues? I think first, do your due diligence on the developer. Has their company been around for a while, or are they brand new? If they're brand new, you could be looking at a potential phoenix. So I dig a bit deeper and see what other companies the owners of the property development firm have been involved with, and see if there's been any issues with them in the past. Next, you need to look at the builder themselves. Ask the developer who the builder was and see what they previously delivered. Even better would be to go and visit previous developments so you can check out the quality of their work. The third and most important thing you need to do is to get an independent building and pest report. The agent might try and pressure you to accept their own building and pest report, but don't do it. While the building and pest reports are supposed to be independent, there's still a potential conflict of interest. The real estate agent's acting for the seller, and realistically, it wouldn't be in their interest for you to uncover any issues, because it's going to potentially reduce the price of the property. Listen, it could be completely unlikely, but it's possible that they use an inspector that's a little bit more lax and might not go through things in as much detail as what you'd like to see as a prospective buyer. Getting your own independent building and pest report means that your inspector is on your side and not the agent's. Hopefully they'll uncover any major issues that you need to be aware of before you make a decision to buy. A building and pest report costs around $500, but in my opinion, it's money well spent. Compare that to a potential loss of $700,000, and you'll see some pretty good value there. You should also take a good look at the property yourself when you go for an inspection. You might not see everything that a licensed inspector would see. You'll still be able to get a feel for the quality of work in the apartment. Take your time to look around the common areas as well as the apartment itself. If you see anything that looks a bit shoddy, it could be a warning sign that there are larger problems at hand. We published a bunch of checklists to help you cover your bases during the inspection process. Head to huntergalloway.com.au/resources and check out Buying an Apartment Checklist for that. Before we wrap this up, let's look at one last thing. How has this problem gotten so bad? You could blame the state and local governments. Between 1994 and 1998, state and local governments across Australia changed regulations so that building certifications were completed by private companies. This opened the door for property developers to engage their own people to approve their work. In other words, the people who are supposed to police the developments are effectively the developers themselves. Talk about conflict of interest. No wonder why the quality of building has slipped over the last couple of decades. So what should they do about it? In my opinion, we need to return to a genuine, independent building certification process. Really, it's the only way that we can guarantee that Australian property buyers are getting the quality they deserve. I also think that the government needs to be way harder on developers using Phoenix companies to avoid liability for their shoddy work. It's basically fraud, and we deserve better. So that wraps up today, guys. What do you think? Are you going to be looking for an apartment pre-94 to 98? What did you think of the strata reports? Let me know below, would love to know. And if you do need any help with finance, remember Hunter Galloway are the home for home buyers across Australia. Hit us up at huntergalloway.com.au. Until next time, I'll see you later.